Construction of Religious Thought in Islam by Dr. Muhammad Iqbal. Lecture 1. When attracted by the forces around him, man has the power to shape and direct them. When thwarted by them, he has the capacity to build a much vaster world in the depths of his own inner being, wherein he discovers sources of infinite joy and inspiration. Hard his lot and frail his being, like a rose leaf, yet no form of reality is so powerful, so inspiring, and so beautiful as the spirit of man. Thus, in his inmost being, man, as conceived by the Quran, is a creative activity, an ascending spirit who, in his own onward march, rises from one state of being to another. But nay, I swear by the sunset's redness, and by the night and its gatherings, and by the moon when at her full, and that from state to state shall ye be surely carried onward. 84, 16 to 19. It is the lot of man to share in the deeper aspirations of the universe around him and to shape his own destiny as well as that of the universe. Now, by adjusting himself to its forces. Now, by putting the whole of his energy to mold its forces to his own ends and purposes. And in this process of progressive change, God becomes a co worker with him provided man takes the initiative. Verily, God will not change the condition of men till they change what is in themselves. 13:11. If he does not take the initiative, if he does not evolve the inner richness of his being, if he ceases to feel the inward push of advancing life, then the spirit within him hardens into stone and he is reduced to the level of dead matter. But his life and the onward march of his spirit depend on the establishment of connections with the reality that confronts him. It is knowledge that establishes these connections, and knowledge is sense perception elaborated by understanding. When thy Lord said to the angels, Verily, I am about to place one in my stead on earth, they said, Wilt thou place there one who will do ill and shed blood? When we celebrate thy praise and extol thy holiness, God said, Verily I know what ye know not. And he taught Adam the names of all things, and then set them before the angels and said, Tell me the names of these if ye are endowed with wisdom. They said, Praise be to thee. We have no knowledge but that thou hast given us to know. Thou art the knowing, the wise. He said, O Adam, inform them of the names. And when he had informed them of the names, God said, Did I not say to you that I know the hidden things of the heavens and of the earth, and that I know what ye bring to light and what ye hide? 2 30 to 33. The point of these verses is that man is endowed with the faculty of naming things, that is to say, forming concepts of them, and forming concepts of them is capturing them. Thus, the character of man's knowledge is conceptual, and it is with the weapon of this conceptual knowledge that man approaches the observable aspect of reality. The one noteworthy feature of the Quran is the emphasis that it lays on this observable aspect of reality. Let me quote here a few verses. Assuredly, in the creation of the heavens and of the earth, and in the alternation of the night and day, and in the ships which pass through the sea, with what is useful to man, and in the rain which God sendeth down from heavens, giving life to the earth after its death, and scattering over it all kinds of cattle, and in the change of the winds, and in the clouds that are made to do service between the heavens and the earth, are signs for those who understand. 2 164. And it is He who hath ordained for you, and ye may be guided thereby in the darkness of the land and of the sea. Clear have we made our signs to men of knowledge, and it is He who hath created you of one breath, and hath provided you an abode and resting place in the womb. Clear have we made our signs for men of insight, and it is He who sendeth down rain from the heaven, and we bring forth by it the buds of all plants, and from them bring we forth the green foliage and the close growing grain, and palm trees with sheets of clustering dates, and gardens of grapes and olive, and the pomegranate, like and unlike. Look you on their fruits when they ripen. Truly herein are signs unto people who believe. 6:97 to 99. Hast thou not seen how thy Lord lengthens out the shadow? Had he pleased, he had made it motionless, but we have made the sun to be its guide. Then draw it in unto us with easy indrawing. 25:45 to 46. Can they not look up to the clouds, how they are created, and to the heaven, how it is upraised, and to the mountains, how they are rooted, and to the earth, how it is outspread? 88:17 to 20. And among his signs are the creations of the heavens and the earth, and your variety of tongues and colors. Herein truly are signs for all men. 30:22. No doubt the immediate purpose of the Quran in this reflective observation of nature is to awaken in man the consciousness of that of which nature is regarded a symbol. But the point to note is the general empirical attitude of the Quran, which engendered in its followers a feeling of reverence for the actual and ultimately made them the founders of modern science. It was a great point to awaken the imperial spirit in an age which renounced the visible as of no value in men's search after God. According to the Quran, as we have seen before, the universe has a serious end. Its shifting actualities force our being into fresh formations. The intellectual effort to overcome the obstruction offered by it, besides enriching and amplifying our life, sharpens our insight and thus prepares us for a more masterful insertion into a subtler aspects of human experience. It is our reflective contact with the temporal flux of things which trains us from an intellectual vision of the non temporal. Reality lives in its own appearances, and such a being as man, who has to maintain his life in an obstructing environment, cannot afford to ignore the visible. The Quran opens our eyes to the great fact of change, through the appreciation and control of which alone it is possible to build a durable civilization. The cultures of Asia and, in fact, of the whole ancient world failed because they approached reality exclusively from within and moved from within outwards. This procedure gave them theory without power, and on mere theory, no durable civilization can be based. There is no doubt that the treatment of religious experience as a source of divine knowledge is historically prior to the treatment of other regions of human experience for the same purpose. The Quran, recognizing that the empirical attitude is an indispensable stage in the spiritual life of humanity, attaches equal importance to all regions of human experiences as yielding knowledge of the ultimate reality which reveals its symbols both within and without. One indirect way of establishing connections with the reality that confronts us is reflexive observation and control of its symbols as they reveal themselves to sense perception. The other way is direct association with that reality as it reveals itself within. The naturalism of the Quran is only a recognition of the fact that man is related to nature, and this relation, in view of its possibility as a means of controlling her forces, must be exploited not in the interest of unrighteous desire for domination, but in the nobler interest of a free upward movement of spiritual life. In the interest of securing a complete vision of reality, therefore, sense perception must be supplemented by the perception of what the Quran describes as fuad or qalb, that is, the heart. God hath made everything which he had created most good, and began the creation of man with clay, that then ordained his progeny from germs of life, from sorry water, then shaped him, and breathed of his spirit unto him, and gave you hearing and seeing and heart. What little thanks do ye return? 32 7 to 9. The heart is a kind of inner intuition or insight which, in the beautiful words of Reme, feeds on the rays of the sun and brings us into contact with aspects of reality other than those open to sense perception. It is, according to the Quran, something which sees, and its reports, if properly interpreted, are never false. We must not, however, regard it as a mysterious special faculty. It is rather a mode of dealing with reality in which sensation, in the physiological sense of the word, does not play any part. Yet the vista of experience thus open to us is as real and concrete as any other experience. To describe it as psychic, mystical, or supernatural does not detract from its value as experience. To the primitive man, all experience was supernatural. Prompted by the immediate necessities of life, he was driven to interpret his experience, and out of this interpretation gradually emerged nature in our sense of the word. The total reality which enters our awareness and appears on interpretation as an empirical fact has other ways of invading our consciousness and offers further opportunities of interpretation. The revealed and mystic literature of mankind bears ample testimony to the fact that religious experience has been too enduring and dominant in the history of mankind to be rejected as mere illusion. There seems to be no reason, then, to accept the normal level of human experience as fact and reject its other levels as mystical and emotional. The fact that the religious experience, among other facts of human experience, and in the capacity of yielding knowledge by interpretation. One fact is as good as another, nor is there anything irreverent in critically examining this region of human experience. The Prophet of Islam was the first critical observer of psychic phenomena. Bukhari and other traditionalists have given us a full account of his observation of the psychic Jewish youth. Ibn Sa'id, whose ecstatic moods attracted the Prophet's notice, he tested him, questioned him, and examined him in various moods. Once he hid himself behind the stem of a tree to listen to his mutterings. The boy's mother, however, warned him of the approach of the Prophet. Thereupon the boy immediately shook off his mood, and the Prophet remarked, if she had let him alone, the thing would have been cleared up. The Prophet's companions, some of whom were present during the course of this first psychological observation in the history of Islam, and even later traditionists who took good care to record this important fact, entirely misunderstood the significance of his attitude and interpreted it in their own innocent manner. Professor MacDonald, who seems to have no idea of the fundamental psychological difference between the mystic and the prophetic consciousness, finds humor enough in this picture of one prophet trying to investigate another, after the method of Society for Psychical Research. a better appreciation of the spirit of the Quran, which, as I will show in a subsequent lecture, initiated the cultural movement terminating in the birth of the modern empirical attitude, would have led the professor to see something remarkably suggestive in the Prophet's observation of the psychic Jew. However, the first Muslim to see the meaning and the value of Prophet's attitude was Ibn Khaldun, who approached the contents of mystic consciousness in a more critical spirit and very nearly reached the modern hypothesis of subliminal selves. As Professor MacDonald says, Ibn Khaldun had some most interesting psychological ideas, and that he would probably have been in close sympathy with Mr. William James's varieties of religious experience. Modern psychology has only recently begun to realize the importance of careful study of the contents of mystic consciousness, and we are not yet in possession of a really effective scientific method to analyze the contents of non rational modes of consciousness. With the time at my disposal, it is not possible to undertake an extensive inquiry into the history and the various degrees of mystic consciousness in point of richness and vividness. All that I can do is to offer a few general observations only on the main characteristics of mystic experience. Number one. The first point to note is the immediacy of this experience. In this respect, it does not differ from other levels of human experience which supply data for knowledge. All experience is immediate, as regions of normal experience are subject to interpretation of sense data for our own knowledge of the external world. So, the region of mystic experience is subject to interpretation for our knowledge of God. The immediacy of mystic experience simply means that we know God, just as we know other objects. God is not a mathematical entity or a system of concepts manually related to one another and having no reference to experience. Number two, the second point is the unanalyzable wholeness of mystic experience. When I experience the table before me, innumerable data of experience merge into a single experience of the table. Out of this wealth of data, I select those that fall into a certain order of space and time and around them, off in reference to the table. In the mystic state, however vivid and rich it may be, thought is reduced to a minimum and such an analysis is not possible. But this difference of the mystic state from the ordinary rational consciousness does not mean discontinuance with the normal consciousness. As Professor William James erroneously thought, in either case, it is the same reality which is operating on us. The ordinary rational consciousness, in view of our practical need of adaptation to our environment, takes that reality piecemeal, selecting successively isolated sets of stimuli for response. The mystic state brings us into contact with the total passage of reality in which all the diverse stimuli merge into one another and form a single, unanalyzable unity in which the ordinary distinction of subject and object does not exist. Number three, the third point is that to the mystic state is a moment of intimate association with a unique other self, transcending, encompassing, and momentarily suppressing the private personality of the subject of experience. Considering its content, the mystic state is highly objective and cannot be regarded as a mere retirement into the mists of pure subjectivity. But you will ask me how immediate experience of God as an independent other self is at all possible. The mere fact that the mystic state is passive does not finally prove the veritable otherness of the self experienced. This question arises in the mind because we assume without criticism, that our knowledge of the external world through sense perception is the type of all knowledge. If we were so, we could never be sure of the reality of our own self. However, in reply to it, I suggest the analogy of our daily social experience. How do we know other minds in our social intercourse? It is obvious that we know our own self and nature by inner reflection and sense perception, respectively. We possess no sense for the experience of other minds. The only ground of my knowledge of a conscious being before me is the physical movements similar to my own from which I infer the presence of another conscious being. Or we may say, after Professor Royce, that our fellows are known to be real because they respond to our signals and thus constantly supply the necessary supplement to our own fragmentary meanings. Response, no doubt, is the test of the presence of a conscious self, and the Quran also takes the same view. And your Lord saith, call me, and I will respond to your call. 40:60. And when my servants ask thee concerning me, then I am nigh unto them, and answer the cry of him that crieth unto me. 2 186. It is clear that whether we apply the physical criterion or the non physical and more adequate criterion of Royce, in either case, our knowledge of other minds remains something like inferential only. Yet we feel that our experience of other minds is immediate and never entertain any doubt as to the reality of our social experience. I do not, however, mean at the present stage of our inquiry to build on the implications of our knowledge of other minds, an idealistic argument in favor of the reality of a comprehensive self. All that I mean to suggest is that the immediacy of our experience in the mystic state is not without a parallel. It is similar to our normal experience and probably belongs to the same category. Number 4. Since the quality of mystic experience is to be directly experienced, it is obvious that it cannot be communicated. Mystic states are more like feeling than thought. The interpretation which the mystic or the prophet puts on the content of his religious consciousness can be conveyed to others in the form of propositions, but the content itself cannot be transmitted. Thus, in the following verses of the Quran, it is the psychology and not the content of experience that is given. It is not for man that God should speak to him, but by vision or from behind a veil, or he sendeth a messenger to reveal by his permission what he will, for he is exalted wise. 42:51. By the star when it setteth, your compatriot erreth not, nor is he led astray, neither speaketh he from mere impulse. The Quran is no other than the revelation revealed to him. One strong in power taught it him. Endowed with wisdom, with even balance stood he in the highest part of the horizon. Then came he nearer and approached, and was at the distance of 2 bows, or even closer. And he revealed to the servant of God what he revealed. His heart falsified not what he saw. What will ye then dispute with him as to what he saw? He has seen him also another time, near the Sidrah tree, which marks the boundary, near which is the garden of repose, when the Sidrah tree was covered with what covered it. His eye turned not aside, nor did it wander, for he saw the greatest of the signs of the Lord. 53 1 to 18. The incommunicability of mystic experience is due to the fact that it is essentially a matter of inarticulate feeling, untouched by discursive intellect. It must, however, be noted that mystic feeling, like all feeling, has a cognitive element also. And it is, I believe, because of this cognitive element that it lends itself to the form of idea. In fact, it is the nature of feelings to seek expression in thought. It would seem that the two, feeling and idea, are the non temporal and temporal aspects of the same unit of inner experience. But on this point, I cannot do better than quote Professor Hawking, who has made a remarkably keen study of feeling in justification of an intellectual view of the content of religious consciousness. What is that other than feeling in which feeling may end? I answer, consciousness of an object. Feeling is instability of an entire conscious self, and that which will restore the stability of this self lies not within its own border but beyond it. Feeling is outward pushing as idea is outward reporting, and no feeling is so blind as to have no idea of its own object. As a feeling possesses the mind, there also possesses the mind as an integral part of that feeling, some idea of the kind of thing which will bring it to rest. A feeling without a direction is as impossible as an activity without direction, and a direction implies some objective. There are vague states of consciousness in which we seem to be wholly without direction. But in such cases, it is remarkable that feeling is likewise in abeyance. For example, I may be dazed by a blow, neither realizing what has happened nor suffering any pain, and yet quite conscious that something has occurred. The experience waits an instant in the vestibule of consciousness, not the feeling, but purely as fact, until idea has touched it and defined a course of response. At that same moment, it is felt as painful. If we are right, feeling is quite as much an objective consciousness as is idea. It refers always to something beyond the present self and has no existence save the directing of self towards that object in whose presence its own career must end. Thus, you will see that it is because of this essential nature of feeling that, while religion starts with feeling, it has never in its history taken itself as matter of feeling alone and has constantly striven after metaphysics. The mystic's condemnation of intellect as an organ of knowledge does not really find any justification in the history of religion. But Professor Hawking's passage, just quoted, has a wider scope than mere justification of idea in religion. The organic relation of feeling and idea throws light on the old theological controversy about verbal revelation, which once gave so much trouble to Muslim religious thinkers. Inarticulate feeling seeks to fulfill its destiny in idea, which in its turn tends to develop out of itself its own visible garment. It is no mere metaphor to say that idea and word both simultaneously emerge out of the womb of feeling, though logical understanding cannot but take them in a temporal order, and thus create its own difficulty by regarding them as mutually isolated. There is a sense in which the word is also revealed. Number 5. The mystic's intimate association with the eternal, which gives him a sense of the unreality of serial times, does not mean a complete break with serial time. The mystic state, in respect of its uniqueness, remains in some way related to common experience. This is clear from the fact that the mystic state soon fades away, though it leaves a deep sense of authority after it has passed away. Both the mystic and the prophet returns to normal levels of experience, but with this difference that the return of the prophet, as I will show later, may be fraught with infinite meaning for mankind. For the purposes of knowledge, then, the region of mystic experience is as real as any other region of human experience and cannot be ignored merely because it cannot be traced back to sense perception. Nor is it possible to undo the spiritual value of the mystic state by specifying the organic conditions which appear to determine it. Even if the postulate of modern psychology as to the interrelation of body and mind is assumed to be true, it is illogical to discredit the value of the mystic state as a revelation of truth. Psychologically speaking, all states, whether their content is religious or non religious, are organically determined. The scientific form of mind is as much organically determined by as the religious. Our judgment as to the creations of genius is not at all determined or even remotely affected by what our psychologists may say regarding its organic conditions. A certain kind of temperament may be a necessary condition for a certain kind of receptivity, but the antecedent condition cannot be regarded as the whole truth about the character of what is received. The truth is that the organic causation of our mental states has nothing to do with the criteria by which we judge them to be superior or inferior in point of value. Among the visions and messages, says Professor William James, some have always been too patently silly. Among the traces and convulsive seizures, some have been too fruitless for conduct and character to pass themselves off as significant, still less as divine. In the history of Christian mysticism, the problem how to discriminate between such messages and experiences as were really divine miracles and such others as the demon in his malice was able to counterfeit, thus making the religious person twofold more the child of hell he was before, has always been a difficult one to solve, needing all the sagacity and experience of the best directors of conscience. In the end, it has come to our empiricist criterion. By their fruits ye shall know them, not by their roots. The problem of Christian mysticism, alluded by Professor James, has been in fact the problem of all mysticism. The demon, in his malice, does counterfeit experiences which creep into the circuit of the mystic state. As we read in the Quran, we have not sent any apostle or prophet before thee, among whose desires Satan injected not some wrong desire, but God shall bring to naught that which Satan had suggested. Thus, God affirm his revelations, for God is knowing and wise. And it is in the elimination of the satanic from the divine that the followers of Freud have done inestimable service to religion. Though I cannot help saying that the main theory of this newer psychology does not appear to me to be supported by any adequate evidence. If our vagrant impulses assert themselves in our dreams, or as other times we are not strictly ourselves, it does not follow that they remain imprisoned in a kind of lumber room behind the normal self. The occasional invasion of these suppressed impulses on the region of our normal self tends more to show the temporary disruption of our habitual system of responses rather than their perpetual presence in some dark corner of the mind. However, the theory is briefly this. During the process of our adjustment to our environment, we are exposed to all sorts of stimuli. Our habitual responses to these stimuli gradually fall into a relatively fixed system, constantly growing in complexity by absorbing some and rejecting other impulses which do not fit in with our permanent system of responses. The rejected impulses recede into what is called the unconscious region of the mind, and there wait for a suitable opportunity to assert themselves and take their revenge on the focal self. They may disturb our plans of actions, distort our thought, build our dreams and fantasies, or carry us back to forms of primitive behavior which the evolutionary process has left far behind. Religion, it is said, is a pure fiction created by these repudiated impulses of mankind with a view to find a kind of fairy tale land for free, unobstructed movement. Religious beliefs and dogmas, according to the theory, are no more than merely primitive theories of nature whereby mankind has tried to redeem reality from its elemental ugliness and to show it off as something nearer to the heart's desire than the facts of life would warrant. That there are religions and forms of arts which provide a kind of cowardly escape from facts of life, I do not deny. All I can contend is that this is not true of all religions. No doubt, religious beliefs and dogmas have a metaphysical significance, but it is obvious that they are not interpretations of those data of experience which are the subject of science of nature. Religion is not physics or chemistry seeking the explanation of nature in terms of causation. It really aims to interpret a totally different region of human experience, religious experience, the data of which cannot be reduced to the data of any other science. In fact, it must be said in justice to religion that it insisted on the necessity of concrete experience in religious life long before science learned to do so. The conflict between the two is due not to the fact that there is one and the other is not, based on concrete experience. Both seek concrete experience as a point of departure. Their conflict is due to the misapprehension that both interpret the same data of experience. We forget that religion aims at reaching the real significance of a special variety of human experience. Nor is it possible to explain away the content of religious consciousness by attributing the whole thing to the working of sex impulse. The two forms of consciousness, sexual and religious, are often hostile or at any rate completely different to each other in point of their character, their aim, and the kind of conduct they generate. The truth is that in a state of religious passion, we know a factual reality in some sense outside the narrow circuit of our personality. To the psychologist, religious passion necessarily appears as the work of the subconscious because of the intensity with which it shakes up the depths of our being. In all knowledge, there is an element of passion, and the object of knowledge gains or loses in objectivity, the rise and fall in the intensity of passion. That is most real to us, which stirs up the entire fabric of our personality. As Professor Hawking pointedly puts it, if ever upon the stupid day length, time span of any self or saint either, some vision breaks to roll his life and ours into new channels. It can only be because that vision admits into his soul some trooping invasion of concrete fullness of eternity. Such vision, doubtless, means subconscious readiness and subconscious resonance too. But the expansion of the unused air cells does not argue that we have ceased to breathe the outer air, the very opposite. A purely psychological method, therefore, cannot explain religious passion as a form of knowledge. It is bound to fail in the case of our newer psychologists, as it did fail in the case of Locke and Hume. The foregoing discussion, however, is sure to raise an important question in your mind. Religious experience, I have tried to maintain, is essentially a state of feeling with a cognitive aspect, the content of which cannot be communicated to others, except in the form of a judgment. Now, when a judgment which claims to be the interpretation of a certain region of human experience, not accessible to me, is placed before me for my assent, I am entitled to ask, what is the guarantee of its truth? As we in possession of a test which would reveal its validity, if personal experience has been only ground for acceptance of a judgment of this kind, religion would have been the possession of a few individuals only. Happily, we are in possession of tests which do not differ from those applicable to other forms of knowledge. These I call the intellectual test and the pragmatic test. By the intellectual test, I mean critical interpretation without any presupposition of human experience, generally with the view to discover whether our interpretation leads us ultimately to a reality of the same character as is revealed by religious experience. The pragmatic test judges it by its fruits. The former is applied by the philosopher, the latter by the prophet. In the lecture that follows, I will apply the intellectual test.